everyone, and welcome to CyberSmart Conversations with Harsha. I'm so delighted to be joined today by Anna Ho, real estate advisor at JLL. Anna helps companies reduce occupancy costs and enhance workplace culture and productivity through real estate, business intelligence, and technology solutions. Thank you for joining, Anna. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you, Anna. One of the questions I always like to start with is to share about the career path. Like, did you anticipate that this would be where you are in your career when you were in university?
Quite the opposite, actually. As you had mentioned, I'm at JLL now doing office leasing, workplace strategy, and sustainable city building is what I like to call it. But I actually spent 8 years in social work and not-for-profit before joining real estate. I started as a frontline trauma and crisis counselor at Victim Services, and then also did some child welfare policy reform work with the government while doing a lot of not-for-profit consulting for boards and committees throughout those 8 years. And in my undergrad, I was studying social work, master's, I studied social work. So my intent was always to stay in the non-for-profit sector. But I ended up getting into a fundraising project, as you would in the world of charity, and it involved a mixed-use property. And it was through that I discovered my passion for real estate. And I realized that, at the core of what real estate is all about is really building healthy, equitable, and sustainable communities. And I couldn't kind of let that go. I was like, I have to learn more about this industry. I had no exposure prior to this project on what commercial real estate is all about, as most people don't. And so I did a deep dive. I met with 50 people in our industry and ended up, deciding that I'm going to pursue a career in commercial real estate and joined JLL.
Wow, that's so inspirational. And like from where you started and now where you are, that's truly inspirational. And you know what? I was browsing your LinkedIn profile and I like this saying of yours that there's a grit and resilience to excel at anything that's set in your mind. That's so
Yes.
inspirational.
Thank you.
So today's topic is office space management. And space, as we all know, it's too precious commodity. Like workplaces are constantly evolving, whether that is a response to growth, incorporating technologies, or adapting to the world around them, like in pandemic. And one thing that is making sure is all the space that is employed is effectively used. And this is one of the ongoing concern. And we have all seen that one of the very important factor in shaping the real estate strategy is maximizing space utilization. So Anna, like why space management is higher on the corporate agenda than ever before?
Well, I think COVID has been a huge catalyst for a major culture shift and new ways of working. There are companies, many companies out there like Citrus that actually had a hybrid work model even before the pandemic. But what's happened is the pandemic has really accelerated this trend and pushed, a lot of groups that were more office centric, like law firms, the JP Morgans of the world, to consider hybrid work, or at least allowing their employees to work from home parts of the week or work in the community, right? Wherever it is that allows that employee to be most productive and the most efficient. So I think, COVID really challenged leaders to think differently about the purpose of the office and how do we achieve, quote unquote, the highest and best use. So highest and best use for many groups might look like driving collaboration. How do we enhance training and development? How do we manage new employees? How do we onboard new employees? And ultimately, those three things are really about driving innovation and always being on the cutting edge for those employers and those companies.
Yeah, and you brought this important point, like management of new employees, and especially during pandemic, like it's so challenging when you onboard new employees. So, like, what are some of the ways in which we can smooth this onboarding process for new employees?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think I can talk a little bit about my onboarding experience because I onboarded during the pandemic as well last April. And What my team did for me was have a 15-hour training program, 1 hour a day over the course of 15 days to introduce me to everything I needed to know about the company, at least, a high level introduction, and obviously did a deep dive as I kind of onboarded and I spent more time in the company. But I think making sure that you have a set schedule where the manager is going to touch base with the employee at least once a day for those new employees. Really, really important for those new employees. For some of your more seasoned employees, maybe you only need, a weekly touch base that's scheduled, that's consistent, but not the case for new employees. And then in addition to that, make sure that you emphasize to the new employee that, at any point during the day, if you have a question, send me an email or give me a call. Let's try to mimic some of those interactions that we have in the office. Keeping that door open, that open line of communication is really, really critical.
Yeah, and this is so helpful, especially when everyone is working remote. Now, coming back to space management, there are different elements that we use to increase the space management, like use of technology and use of aesthetics, lighting. There are so many things. So, what are some of the key elements you think are important that can increase the space management effectiveness?
hmm So I think first and foremost is leveraging technology. Like that is number one. So many groups, I mean, the big Fortune 500 companies, they have already been leveraging technology, gathering data through utilization sensors, all of these things for a long time. But some of those other companies, it's a newer kind of tool that's being introduced to their employees and to management. So, leveraging technology to ease things like scheduling, desk booking, meeting room booking, and then, tying those type of apps that allow employees to book those spaces, et cetera, into facilities management. So, JLL Jet, as an example, it's a comprehensive hybrid workplace app that allows employees to sort of have access to a one-stop shop, a one platform to do all of their workplace kind of requests and management and needs. So you can book space, you can generate guest passes, you can submit service or facilities requests, you can sync your calendars, schedule meetings, all with using one app. And then from the facilities management standpoint, you can also sync this app to, sensors, beacons, lighting, environmental control, AV control. So it's, about leveraging technology to automate some of those mundane tasks to drive efficiency and effectiveness in the workplace. So, from a sustainability standpoint, it's even more important that we have these type of sensors because, as we know, almost 40% of total carbon emissions globally is as a result of real estate. Mm-hmm. So as real estate service providers at JLL, as landlords, owners, and developers, and as tenants, we have a paramount role to play in making sure that we're doing our part to reduce our emissions and save the planet.
And you mentioned about technology. So in pandemic, we have seen an increase in use of these visitor management system. But before that, all these were manual, like there was a manual workflow that needs to be followed. But we have seen an increase in use of visitor management and these mobile apps and touchless sensors in office space. Mm-hmm. And one thing that is, you talked about sensors, like capturing data to know how well the space is utilized and then driving insights out of those sensor data. But then we have also seen integration with other building systems like building automation system and lighting, so that when the space is utilized at its maximum capacity or when there are no occupants, so that we can optimally change the temperature settings and lightings. So what are the benefits of integrating the space management with other building operations? And what are the trends you are seeing?
The benefit of having building automation and utilization sensors to help us gather this data is because data equals insights equals efficiency, right? And for any landlord, building manager, or any company, data is intangible. It's invaluable, to have access to something like this. So, when you're able to kind of use an app like JLL Jet as an example, to integrate, all of your employees' day-to-day needs, and then also your facilities manager and your building operators, their needs, it just drives, like I said, more efficiency, more insights. How do we, improve how we manage the building currently, how we manage our tenant space. As a tenant, how do we maximize the use of our space, while also keeping in mind those things like, controlling temperature, controlling lighting, because one of the things that we also talk about at JLL, it's part of our $420 million technology platform, is something called 330-300, which is essentially, you spend $3 on utilities, $30 per square foot on rent on average, and $300 per square foot per employee. The opportunity for savings is really around the employees. And we're not talking about cutting salaries by any means. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, how do we drive productivity, health, and wellness to drive the bottom line? When employees are happier and they're healthier, they're going to be more productive and they're going to be more effective in their jobs. Harvard University, the World Green Building Council, they've done studies on this, and they found that, employees are 14% or X amount of percent more productive when they have exposure to things like biophilia, natural lighting, temperature control, all of these things that maybe traditionally as employers, we don't think about. But these are the things that landlords and building operators think about. And it's so, so important for keeping employees happy, healthy, productive, which ultimately drives, the company's bottom line. And it's a win-win for everybody.
Yes, and we have seen this, if the lighting and the temperature are optimum, it drives productivity.
It absolutely does. Yeah. And we talk a lot about this at JLL with our 330-300 principle tool.
Yeah. And now coming back to pandemic, and you mentioned this before, there's a need of hybrid workplaces. So organizations have had to do without the office during lockdown. And we are seeing this. The question is, will they ever go back? And recently I was reading this article on workplace FOMO is real, which is like fear of missing out. So like, how has COVID changed the demand for office space? And how you'll answer this? Like, will they ever go back, or will go with the hybrid work culture? Like, what are the changes you are seeing in the office space demand?
Whenever I get this question, I like to talk about the hybrid continuum, because there is no one size fits all for any company. We've seen JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, law firms in particular, come out and say, we're going to stay office centric. So they're on the other side of the spectrum. But then we have folks like Twitter that are embracing remote work. But then we also have folks like Microsoft, that are in the middle, Microsoft and Netflix. They're like, we want to embrace a hybrid model of work because we still see the value in having a physical office space. But it's also the benefit of giving employees the flexibility to sometimes work from home or at a coffee shop or at a client site. So what's interesting to note is that Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they've all publicly come out and said that they've spent more money on their real estate this year, in 2020 than ever before. And in 2020, 42% of US companies surveyed in 16 cities actually expanded their real estate in 2020.
That's interesting.
So, it's not quite the narrative of everyone is downsizing and everyone's going to go hybrid. That is not the case. It really depends on your industry, the employee specific job function, the employees' preferences and living situation at home. There's so many factors that, go into considering whether work from home, work in the office, work in the community is a good fit for the employee. So with the companies that are looking to downsize, we are seeing roughly 30% of space that they're shedding. And for those who are kind of who are upsizing, we're also seeing, a 20 to 30% increase in space. So, I think it's an ever evolving and moving target. There is no one size fits all, like I said. And, we saw Shopify as an example, a Canadian e-commerce company come out last year in April and said, we're going to send our employees to work remote for the rest of the year. And we're going to take a more permanent approach to remote work. But in July of 2020, they had the option to give back 25% of their space at the Well in downtown Toronto, and they chose to exercise that option. So we have to be very mindful of what are headline grabbers or what are decisions that are being made in the middle of the pandemic versus what's actually happening on the ground. It's not to say by any means that Shopify, is going to commit to more office space or going to be office centric by any means, but it's to say that, they made that announcement, but yet just 3 months later, they still chose to keep their office space. So, what I would gather from all of these studies that were done by Gensler, Steelcase, PwC, all of these consulting firms, is that, every 3 months, a new survey comes out, new data comes out, new employee and employer preferences come out. One study by Steelcase, as an example, from globally around the world, surveyed countries like China, US, Canada, Sweden, Australia. The employee sentiments that they gathered in January of 2021 was that roughly 40 to 70%, depending on the country, of employees said that they only want to work from home 1 day a week.
Okay.
So that's a really, really interesting insight. Canada and China both had almost the exact same employee sentiments. Even Canada is, or was still under a lockdown in January, while China was, the first to open their economy and get back to the offices. So at the end of the day, you and I have talked about this before, is that as human beings, even though we can and we have the ability to work 100% remote, meet new people and live our lives behind a computer screen, it doesn't mean that we should. Psychology and physiology tells us that as human beings, we still need physical touch. A hug is so powerful to boosting those, hormones and those stress reducing hormones and resilience and boosting your immune system. So many studies that talk about this. So, I'm a hybrid worker personally, I have to say. I do love the balance between work from home and work in the office. And being under lockdown right now and an emergency stay-at-home order, I'm really, really missing the office. But I imagine that even when post-pandemic, when things open up, I'm going to be a hybrid worker. So even though I work in real estate and, my opinion could be biased, but I'm really trying to stay as neutral as possible and really talk about all of the insights that we're seeing around the world that are being published by, third-party companies like Deloitte, PwC, all of these folks. So the last piece that I want to sort of leave everybody with is, once again, it's not one size fits all. Every company, industry, employee, job function is going to be different. And even though I work for JLL, second largest global commercial real estate firm, and obviously we're in the business of doing real estate, I think at the end of the day, though, here at JLL and my role, whatever it is that is the best fit in the best interest of the client, that's what we should be doing. So whether that is downsizing by 40% or 70%, I just helped a non-for-profit downsize by almost 70% actually. They were way oversized even before the pandemic, so that's why they downsized so much. They really should have been roughly 50% of the space that they already had pre-pandemic. So that's the reason why they downsized so significantly. But for some organizations, they're going to keep the same size of their existing office, because even though they introduced remote work, the company has grown by 30% during the pandemic, right? Or more or less, give or take. So it's really individual to that specific company, to that specific culture, and whatever it is the best fit for that client. That's what we're going to support you to do. And that's what your real estate advisor should support you to do at the end of the day. So I'll leave it at that. And thank you so much for having me, Harsha. It's been a joy to chat with you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for sharing those practical insights, and it was a pleasure to have you on the podcast.